It's a pleasure. And I've been invited to talk about clowning and dementia. And as Kate said, I'm an Atlantic Fellow, a Senior Atlantic Fellow. So last year I was in Trinity College, Dublin, for a 1-year experience as an Atlantic Fellow. And I'm a professor in Porto Alegre in Brazil. I live in the south of Brazil, in the capital of the last state in the map. And as Kate said, my personal experience with dementia is my father has normal pressure hydrocephaly. And of course, we have a lot of struggles with the using a drain and doing neurosurgeries more than once. But he is managing to have good quality of life, and he enjoys being in the garden with his grandson, so we are happy. My personal experience connected to my professional interest is one of a child that loved listening to stories of my grandmother and of my kind of grandfather. He wasn't a real grandfather, but he was. I was seeing him a lot in the farm, me and my sister and brother, and we listened to a lot of stories. So I learned to respect this ability from older people and really enjoy this talent. And when I went to do my master's and PhD studies in psychology, I was studying how older adults tell stories, and later how people with Alzheimer's disease tell stories. And my mentor in that time worked with neuropsychology. So the thesis was about cognition and the ability to tell stories. However, I was really enjoying the beautiful stories that I was listening to. And I felt really like there was something uncomfortable in me because I wasn't working directly with this beauty of the stories. I was working with how much coherence or how much people can actually stay in the topic that they're talking about, and how much they can present new ideas in their stories, which is very relevant in order for a speech therapist to work on these abilities, but which I felt that my work was incomplete when I wasn't talking about the messages that I was actually learning and listening to. So I went off in a course in a library because my PhD was done in Barcelona. And I went off to study how people tell stories with artists too, because I was feeling this kind of emptiness in the hospital from not really feeling that the stories were valued, and that I would have people among my colleagues that would be really interested in this part, this humane part of my thesis. So anyway, I wanted to give you this background, that I feel that in science, and especially in the biomedical area, we really need to start getting closer and closer to art in order to really appreciate aspects of human communication that science hasn't been really focusing in. And I think that artists have a very sensitive way of looking at these, at stories, at the way we express ourselves, and we can learn a lot about communication with artists. But anyway, let's go to the results of my thesis and what I learned about how people with Alzheimer's disease build their discourse and what cognitive abilities are related to that. So I learned that episodic memory, working memory, and language comprehension play important roles in how people maintain topic in conversation, in storytelling, and how they are able to express new ideas in their discourse. I also learned that people that live with Alzheimer's disease use a lot of strategies to keep telling their stories. In the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, these strategies show a lot of awareness of their difficulties to express ideas on the topic of the story. For example, they can justify telling how they are having a problem with memory. They can check the comprehension of the person who is listening to them. They often ask for help in recovering an information. So later on, as Alzheimer's disease progresses, then we still find strategies that are preserved. And these strategies have a lot to do with procedural memory, which is very preserved in the late stages. And the most automatic kind of communication that we use is conversation. And this stays with us longer. So the ability to occupy a turn in conversation or to deliver back a turn is carried out through the late stages when people still speak. So they might deliver back a question because they are actually occupying their turn and having a way to continue this conversation. So they give back the turn for the person who was talking to them. Or they might repeat a word, the last word that the person that was speaking to them said, and this is a strategy. Why am I talking about this? Because many times when people talk to people who live with Alzheimer's disease, they're only looking at their ways of communicating as if this is just a sign of an impairment. But actually, the way they communicate is based on their strategies. It's based on what they can do. So there's a lot of things we can do to facilitate their communication. One thing that I learned is that the preferred gender of storytelling would be autobiographical stories of meaningful events. And usually personal anecdotes are very, very good for these, for conversations about life. So stories that a person repeated a lot in their life and that has a lot to do with their identity. Sometimes it's funny stories. These are stories that are the most coherent. Also, stories about love. This was something that I noticed in my thesis. People were talking a lot about their first love or their child or someone that they met, a friend. Important and meaningful stories were the best in terms of coherence. And then I noticed that if I use the knowledge of family members to know more about the stories that these people could tell me, and if they could give me crucial information about the stories, such as participants, scenery, complication, because the narrative usually has something different that happens that can take the balance out of the characters of the story, and then a resolution, something that happens to resolve the problem or to keep the balance. So these crucial aspects, if we know them in advance, we can have a very interesting and informative conversation with someone who lives with Alzheimer's disease. Because even though they were speaking about these topics that I was bringing up as prompts, their own speech was bringing up new ideas, not only repeating what I was saying. So it was very useful for them to recover information, relevant information in their discourse. And then later on, I decided to make a study about how much visual information can help people with Alzheimer's disease tell stories, because the auditive information goes away from memory, from working memory, and you don't want to keep intruding in a person's speech. So the best way to have a conversation could be using an aid such as an album of pictures with phrases. And this I started thinking of because of studies of a speech therapist, an American speech therapist called Michelle Bourgois. I don't know if anyone of you heard of her, but she worked with memory wallets. So I did a study on using eye tracking to understand how much people who live with Alzheimer's disease actually look at personal pictures and relevant sentences to tell stories, and how much this actually would help them. And what I found out is that looking at photos and short sentences that contain crucial information was actually a very useful kind of aid, and that the amount of new ideas expressed was greater when looking at these relevant pictures and written sentences. I also found out that the communication partner that is having a conversation with the person who lives with Alzheimer's disease should help in selecting what would be looked at. Because if you show more pictures at the same time, or if you have irrelevant information being shown in that moment, then it really doesn't help. So it's good to have this being guided through, this conversation being guided through with the visual stimulus being shown by the communicative partner. And this I'm talking about people who live with moderate stage Alzheimer's disease. So in the early stages, it could be different. And so we have to take in consideration that this independence is also something from each case, right? I also found out that looking at my face as a listener was longer. I had longer periods of people with Alzheimer's disease looking at the face than people without Alzheimer's disease. And why is this? Because there is a thing called gaze adverting that helps us plan our discourse. So, of course, we do, for social reasons, we do look at our listener's face, but we also tend to look away in order to plan our discourse, in order to concentrate independently in what we're saying without getting so much visual information. So this type of strategy wasn't used as much by people with dementia. And this was significant compared to people who didn't live with dementia. So in a way, it shows that people living with dementia have, they expect something from their listener. So they're really looking at, because they also need this information coming from the listener. and this story is going to be built together. So after this period as a researcher, where I lived in Sweden and in Lisbon, I went back to Brazil and I got into the university as a professor. And as I told you, I'm a speech therapist, and part of the curriculum, a great part of the curriculum, is supervising students in their practical experiences. And my experience with patients with neurological disorders was bringing me back again to the hospital. And I worked in the university hospital in Porto Alegre. And this happened, this brought me to the study of aphasia. Because in Brazil, aphasia due to stroke is the main cause of disability and death in Brazil. So aphasia is difficulty with language due to a brain lesion in areas related to language. Usually it's the left hemisphere. And the stroke management and treatment is getting better in Brazil. So we have greater numbers of people living with aphasia because not everyone recovers completely from stroke. And then we have a large population of people living with frustration during communication, social isolation, stigma, and this all also brings to high levels of depression. So we also have studies showing that depression and disability incidences are high in Brazilian stroke survivors. And these are associated with communication deficits. So this is a sign that it is usually the people who live with aphasia who are feeling depressed and isolated. We also have a study that shows that participation in groups moderates the effects of disability and quality of life in Brazilian stroke survivors. So there's a sign here that the work with groups could be a very important strategy for interventions with this population. And this is where it comes for the whole point of what I'm talking. I brought my experience with aphasia here to talk about the lessons that I learned with a group of people with aphasia, and that actually led me to think about how much this experience can be also extended to other populations and populations with dementia. So this group of people with aphasia, I was sending, I had to make a group in the university because I really felt that staying in the hospital wasn't the answer, and that these people needed long-term, a long-term, let's say, I don't want to call it rehabilitation, but an intervention that can continue with them. Social inclusion was actually what they needed. And we decided to make this group in the university because that was the space that I could have at that time. So we started offering a group at 11 in the morning, and we would use the other slots of the morning for individual speech therapy sessions. And our team would arrive at 8. And when we arrived, we would find this group of people sitting in front of the building at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they were waiting for the meeting that was going to happen at 11. So it was very strong this message that what they really wanted from us was more than individual speech therapy sessions, was the group. Because not all of them got individual speech therapy sessions, and they were there very early. And so we decided to do a focus group with them to understand what the group meant for them, and what they were finding out about being in this group. And what we got from them were messages pointing out to feelings of connection. So they stressed that they felt strength among them, that they really loved being together, that it meant a lot to them, and that the group was like a family to them. They also said that they now felt courage and will to speak with the group. So they said that they were speaking more when they were in group, and that they were feeling more like braver to speak outside of the group and go and ask for an information in the street, for example. And they were actually feeling like talking and communicating because of the group. They also mentioned that they were playing an active role in the group, which for them was very important. So they explained that here they actually, in the group, they actually could do different things. And that, for example, sometimes when they were in their families, they could feel a super protective wife, for example, that wouldn't be letting them speak as much because she was trying to help. They also mentioned that in the group they really enjoyed doing things like working with art, taking pictures, reading. So a lot of cultural aspects that gave them pleasure. And they mentioned that group was better than speech therapy, and that they didn't want to feel better or worse. They wanted to be together. So this was actually a very strong message that our team got. And the next question was, what do you want to do? What are the activities that you want to have here in this group? And we live in the south of Brazil, as I showed you in the map, and one of the main customs of the people here in the south of Brazil is drinking mate. I don't know if anyone has heard of this drink. It's an indigenous drink, and it's a herb. It's like a tea, and you drink it with a metal straw. It's very hot, and you share it in a circle. So everyone drinks from the same cup, and it provides a subliminal message that everyone is equal. And this was a very interesting thing, and it still is a part of the culture of our group. So it's the group doesn't start until mate hasn't started being passed over in the circle. They also said they wanted plenty of time to talk about different topics. They wanted to listen to music together. They wanted picnics and cultural events, parties and live music and dancing. For my surprise, the dancing and the music was one of the most special things that was happening with our group. And I had to teach my students that this was very relevant as a therapeutic activity. Because when you have an education so focused in biomedical aspects, probably they were behaving as this is just a moment of a break for us, and when going to a corner to take a coffee. But this was something I had to take time to make them understand that these were moments that we had people who weren't speaking in our group starting to speak, and people starting to gesture a lot and use a lot of other communicative strategies because of their pleasure, because of the feeling that this is an activity that really takes off the judgment and takes off that feeling that, oh, I have to really focus on how I'm going to say things or what I'm going to say. Because when you're in a party, you're dancing, this drops out. So we tried to understand how could we make this happen in a structured way. And we asked them, what kind of structure do you want this group to start having? And they mentioned two kinds of things. One, they wanted some kind of organization that would be permanent for them, that they wouldn't be discharged from therapy, but this wouldn't be a therapy, it would be a place to connect with each other. So we figure this is an association. And also they said, we want to do theater. And this was probably some kind of sign they were getting from me that I could, that's my dream, because I always loved doing theater. And I was frustrated with that. And suddenly they were saying, come on and do theater with me. So I went on to learn about how I could be a clown. And that's how we started with our clowning group. This is our group that after we have made the association. So not all of them, just a few of them are wearing the t-shirt of the association, but this is one of our parties. And these are examples of basic theater groups. So this one is in Canada, in Montreal. And there's one in São Paulo, in Brazil. This one is has been founded by a person living with aphasia, and he's an actor. And here he's actually working with clowning, but he doesn't concentrate or focus only on clowning. They also work a lot with dancing. And this is when I started my initiation in clowning, because it could be, I use the word initiation because here in Brazil, that's the word used when you start studying clowning. It's like you go into a school of self-knowledge practically, because clowning will demand a lot of you to be honest to yourself and to let the vulnerable states and the innocence that you have come out. So clowning is not about making up a character and trying to be funny. Many people have this image of clowns. They're afraid of clowns. But this is because there is a type of commercial clown that is actually wearing a mask full of makeup. The therapeutic clowns are not like that. So we don't use heavy makeup. We don't use clothes that is artificial. The clothes that we use is actually something that you would like to wear, but you are embarrassed to wear because you think maybe it's too much and you would love to do that. So this is the opportunity to be eccentric and authentic at the same time. Our view of clowning then follows what theater masters like Lecoq studied in clowning. So he mentioned that clowning is about accepting vulnerability and allowing others to be in that state. It is a state of anti-intellectualism. It's a kind of pure emotion. And this is something that is very useful for people working in the health area, because and any kind of science, because there's so much to do with intellectualism and so much of putting things in the box. And when you work with clowning, it really you have to break these concepts down and value the innocence of being. So it's a very beautiful and humbling art. And there are studies about clowning in the health context, especially in the area of dementia. So there are studies showing that clowning is very well accepted by adults. And there is enough already in the literature about this. In Australia, there was a randomized control trial about the effect of clowning, of clown visiting. So that's different from what I do. Everything that's published right now, the most of it is about clown visiting. So what I work with is active clowning. So our group, they are clowns. We have been working with this since 2012. They have performed in theaters. But in this case, clown visiting is what is most popular in science publications. And what the SMILE study in Australia found is that clown visiting is very effective for reducing agitation in the lives of people living with dementia in nursing homes. But they also tested for reducing depression and in social engagement, quality of life, and this they couldn't find any significant results. However, other researchers in Australia actually brought up the understanding about quantitative results in terms of quality of life, because they also showed with a scale, using a scale, a quality of life scale, interviewing family members about the quality of life. And they found also that the family members responded to these scales, showing that there wasn't a change in the quality of life of people with dementia after clown visiting. And these researchers decided to analyze all the videos of the clown visits to understand what was going on, because the clown visits were full of beautiful moments. There was a lot of interaction happening. There was a lot of communication blossoming. But what was going on that wasn't being reported in the quality of life scale. And an interesting reflection that this article of Dunn and colleagues made in 2019 is actually the difference between quality moments of life and, let's say, a change in quality of life in general. So if you think of the moments of pleasure that were offered in that moment, with making a difference in the present moment for those people, then there was lots of reported results in this study, which is a qualitative study, that deserve attention. So I think that it's very important that we take into consideration the depth of the experience through qualitative research also. So we have another researcher in Canada, and that is Pia Contos. She has been studying clown visiting with people with dementia. And one of my favorite articles of this researcher is this one that I showed to you, Presence Redefined, the reciprocal nature of engagement between elder clowns and persons with dementia. And this is a very interesting article because it goes through the understanding of what happens during engagement between elder clowns and people with dementia. And it has to do with the sharing of playful moments. It has to do with nonverbal communication going on in those moments. And it's a very interesting article. Then something closer to what I do, which is related with performance. And this is actually an author from Australia. It seems like Australians have a lot of humor and love working with clowning. So in this article, Stevens shows that stand-up comedy is a very effective way of working with people with dementia. And he showed actually results with his qualitative study. He showed results related to communication and related to the feelings of well-being that were reported and that were observed through this study. So I also recommend this study. And then talking about the approach that we use here in our group. And one of the things that I think is very good about this approach with clowning is that it doesn't focus on providing a visit or a session, like a speech therapy session, meant to repair language deficits. So in this case, I'm not saying that speech language isn't important. It's very important, but it's for another purpose. But people have a need to also be interacting in an environment that is not focused on getting better. And this is focusing in expressive creation. So you create the way you are going to communicate. And this it releases a lot of anxiety when you have this kind of activity. And it also may shift perspectives on what is actually success and what is actually failure. Because clowns are free to show everything without shame. So they actually have the most success when they show their failures. That's when people love them. That's when people say, great, I'm not the only one. And they laugh together because I can understand what he's feeling. So it's a lot about empathy. And it's a lot about jumping out from a state of looking close to a problem and being able to look at it in a different way and being able to laugh about it. So one of the things that I find interesting about clowning with people with aphasia is that we have a social context that is totally different in this case. So in the social context of clowning, diverse communication is extremely welcome. The most diverse, the most interesting. So clowns, they increase their facial and bodily expression. And also, when you're having a group of clowns that are both people living with aphasia and people who don't live with aphasia, students, undergraduate students in the health area, you have an opportunity to have the same footing of communication. So people living with aphasia will be in the same let's say, that they can communicate non-verbally as well as anyone else. So they feel there is no more this barrier of, oh, I don't communicate as well as someone else. And there's freedom from conventions that often create stigma. And this is not only about speech and language, but also about how we look, about how the body can be. And clowns are really, really, when you learn about your clown, you're discovering your own clown, you really accept to your own body. So you find more comfortable in loving your body as it is. And sharing emotions and exposing failure is desirable. And also there is a chance that because of this, there would be a change in beliefs on one's ability to influence events. So this is a possibility, and we want to study this possibility. We also know that this context entails active playfulness, which increases connection with others and with oneself, and it's associated with well-being. And these kind of interventions where you get a social context that frees you from stigma have a lot to do with the thoughts of certain authors such as Paulo Freire, such as Augusto Boal. These are both Brazilians. And Augusto Boal is a theater master, and he was a student of Paulo Freire, and there's lots of games that we play that Augusto Boal proposed, and they believe that fighting against stigma through active engagement can promote successful social change. So when you work with the performance, you're also working with the aspect of changing what society thinks, because if you open for the public to see this happening, then you also change the minds and thoughts of people around in the society who don't understand about how it is to live with cognitive impairments, and they change their views about it. Here I have some stories. So I'll tell you a little bit about this lady who is in our group. She's 67 years old. She lives with aphasia. She actually works with taking care of a person living with dementia. Her stroke, she had 2 strokes now, and her strokes were in the house, in the home of this person living with dementia. She's like family to this person, and so she often brings her thoughts about dementia in our group too. And she really would love to have this person come with her in the group, but she hasn't managed to convince the family to bring him. But anyway, this lady, she was very serious. She was, like you can see here in this picture, when she came to us, she suffered from depression. She still, of course, has to be careful and take care of herself in this aspect. But there was something very interesting that happened to her when she started clowning. And it wasn't immediate that she decided to become a clown. She spent some time in a situation where she was very afraid of having another stroke, and we were together. We went together I spent around 4 hours with her, and it was thankfully not a stroke, but that was a time where she reflected a lot about life, and she held my hand and she said, if I can get through this, I really want to make a change. And I think perhaps if I can be in the clowning group, if you can have me there, maybe that could be an opportunity to change this. Because this was a lady who was part of our conversation group that was happening. And we always open for any participant to go into the clowning group, which happens in another day. So we invite people. And she never showed any interest in that. But once she started, she, let me show again the picture. She started building her clown, and it was a very powerful experience because she started to love wearing makeup. She made her own dress. She made her this thing she has in the head. So she changed a lot in her way of expressing herself with her clown, and showed a lot of power in this clown. And very wise, very interesting. And then we decided to interview her to understand what was going on. And she said, after some months of clowning changes me a lot. It makes me forget many things. Before clowning, I did not go anywhere. That she meant out of the group that she was going, of course, for the group. I just left home and went to work. Since I lost my mother, I've never been doing anything else. Her work is a caregiving work. And before that, what she had was also caregiving for her mother in her personal life. I feel something else when I am a clown, as if I am someone else. I made that number with the tarot reading, because she's a gypsy as a clown, playing that I can guess things. It seems that we are actually living that, especially when we are in the theater. When I rehearse, I put on my clothes and makeup. I feel more at ease, calmer, more comfortable. I feel at ease. When I was a kid, I acted in a theater presentation in school, and I never forgot that. Clowning brings me back to childhood. Now at work, I have fun and play with my boss, this person who lives with dementia. And I say, how about Yaya? Yaya is her clown name. And he likes it. So we also decided to use quality of life scales and a scale of well-being to understand if there was a change. And we noticed with these scales, of course, this is a study case, but there is a change, especially in scores related to communication. And this is a scale that is called the Quality of Life Scale for Aphasia. There is also a very interesting higher score in energy. So feelings of being full of energy. This changed, and also positive effect, an increase in positive effect, and a decrease in negative effect. And then if you look at satisfaction with life, there is a very small effect. So that reminds me a little bit about the studies on quality of life with using the scales. And perhaps when you analyze the general effect of being satisfied with your life, it may not change. But there are other things that are happening with clowning, and that's to do with perhaps the present moment in that situation. And that could be something very relevant for the life, for bringing meaning to the life of people. We are going to conduct a study which uses both quantitative and qualitative analysis. And it's with people who live with aphasia. We want to understand if active clowning can have a significant effect in functional communication and quality of life. Also, if it can change the perception of how much they can have attainment of goals that the participants themselves set up. And we want to understand the qualitative experience. So how much does nonverbal communication change during clowning sessions? How are the patterns of playfulness of our group? And how do people express emotion during clowning? And we also want to understand what is going on with our students, with the undergraduate students that are part of our group. How, if this actually makes a difference in their understanding of aphasia, in their understanding of life, and how they should relate to people when they work with their clients in the future. And we want to understand the perception of the audience of our clowning group. So we will also have a questionnaire, a survey done with an audience. So this is what we are planning. It's going to happen this year. We got support from the Global Brain Health Institute and the Alzheimer's Association. It's an award for fellows, for Atlantic Fellows. And I was very happy to get this, and it's the first time we're really going to do a large study. And because of this, we also were able to get out of the hospital and the university. The hospital we had already stepped out, but now the university, because we feel that the place that we should be meeting is a space, a public space where everyone is invited to go in the same terms. So it's a cultural center, and by this we want to facilitate social inclusion. It's called Casa de Cultura Mário Quintana. It's the dearest cultural center in Porto Alegre. And we have been having great experiences there in the last months since we moved. We have been interacting in different spaces of this cultural center. Here is the children's library, but we are going to present a performance in the theater of the cultural center in the end of this year. So we have been included in many moments of this cultural center, and it's a great experience for everyone. And here is a blessing from Mário Quintana, the poet that gave his name to the cultural center. He lived his whole life in this building because it used to be a hotel. And he says, "Don't waste your time chasing butterflies. Mend your garden and the butterflies will come." And that's, I think, is a very nice clowny message for all of us. Your references, and thank you very much.